In the shadowed cradle of the eternal winter, where the moon's silver gaze pierced the frost like a forgotten vow, iron chains whispered secrets of captivity long before they ever touched skin. Ilara Wynn stumbled through the biting gale, her bare feet numb against the snow-swept stones of the outer courtyard. The wind howled like distant wolves, carrying the scent of pine and impending doom, as the guard's rough hands propelled her forward. She was no stranger to rejection. Her Omega nature had marked her as fragile from birth, a whisper in a world of roars. But this was exile carved in iron. The chains around her wrists clinked with every faltering step, cold metal biting into her flesh, drawing thin rivulets of blood that froze almost as quickly as they welled. They were heavy, unyielding, forged in the deep forges of the Drakov citadel, symbols of the king's unassailable law. Yet in her chest, a quiet ache pulsed, not from the wounds, but from the emptiness where belonging should have been. The citadel loomed ahead, its spires jagged against the bruised sky, cloaked in a perpetual shroud of ice. Torches flickered along the battlements, their flames dancing like captive spirits, casting long shadows that twisted across the snow like accusing fingers. Ilara's breath came in shallow clouds, her dark hair matted with frost, clinging to her pale cheeks. She had been cast out from the pack's warmth not for treason, but for something far worse, the unknown. Whispers had followed her since girlhood, visions in the night, dreams of silver light unraveling the stars, but the elders called it madness, a curse unfit for the lunar bloodlines that sustained the realm. Unworthy, they had snarled, binding her before the hearthfire's dying embers, their eyes gleaming with the fear of what they could not control. Now, as the great oak doors groaned open under the archway, admitting a rush of warmer air laced with the musk of gathered wolves, Ilara felt the weight of judgment settle like fresh snow. The hall beyond was a cavern of stone and shadow, vaulted ceilings lost in gloom, where the air hung thick with the scent of fir and forge smoke. Rows of alphas lined the walls, their forms hulking and armored, eyes glowing faintly amber in the torchlight. At the far end, upon a throne of carved obsidian veined with silver, sat King Cassian Drakov. His presence was a storm contained, broad shoulders draped in a cloak of midnight fur, his face a map of stern lines etched by years of war and loss. The crown upon his brow was no glittering bauble, but a circlet of twisted iron, mirroring the chains that bound her, symbols of duty's cruel embrace. She was shoved to her knees before the dais, the impact jarring through her bones, sending fresh pain lancing up her arms. The chains rattled, pulling taut as a guard yanked her head back by the hair, forcing her gaze to meet the king's. Cassian's eyes, a piercing gray like storm clouds over snow, held no mercy, only the weary vigilance of a ruler who had seen too many betrayals. Guilt shadowed him, though he wore it like armor. Rumors spoke of a queen lost to the wilds, a wound that festered beneath his stoic command. "State your name, outcast," he intoned, his voice a low rumble that echoed off the stones, carrying the weight of the entire court. Ilara's throat tightened, the cold seeping deeper into her soul. What name could she offer? The one they had stripped from her, or the one that haunted her dreams? The iron bit harder, a reminder of her fragility, her place at the bottom of the hierarchy. Around her, the alphas murmured, their breaths visible in the chill that permeated even this hall. The wind outside battered the walls, a mournful dirge, while inside the torches spat and hissed, flames leaping as if eager for blood. Ilara Wynn," she whispered, but the words caught, fragile as frost on a window pane. The king leaned forward, his expression unchanging, yet something flickered in his gaze, a curiosity perhaps, or the echo of his own hidden fractures. He had rejected many in his reign, banishing threats to preserve the fragile peace after the blood wars. But this Omega stirred an unease he could not name. Her scent, faint amid the chain's metallic tang, was like wild heather under moonlight, untamed and ancient. The High Elder stepped forward, his robes whispering over the flagstones, a ledger clutched in gnarled hands. "She is accused of sorcery, my king. Visions that defy the goddess's will. The pact demands her end, exile to the frozen wastes, or the pyre." His voice dripped with accusation, eyes narrowing on Alara as if she were a blight upon the moon's purity. Cassian's jaw tightened, the iron crown glinting as he shifted. Duty warred within him. The realm teetered on the edge of rival packs' incursions, whispers of treason from the southern borders. To show weakness now could unravel it all. Yet as he regarded her, chained and trembling, a pang of something akin to recognition stirred. His own scars, hidden beneath armor, ached faintly, the mark of a vow broken, a love lost to ambition's blade. "Speak your truth, Omega," he commanded, softer than intended, the words hanging in the air like a challenge to fate itself. Alara met his stare, her heart pounding a rhythm that matched the distant howl of wind through the peaks. The chains felt heavier, a cage not just of metal, but of expectation, binding her to silence. In that moment, under the weight of countless eyes, she felt the first stir of defiance, a spark amid the cold. But what truth could shatter iron? The moon above, hidden by the citadel's roof, seemed to pulse in answer, its light a distant promise, or a curse waiting to unfold. The court held its breath, the silence broken only by the crackle of torches and the soft drip of her blood upon the stone. Ilara's mind raced, visions flickering at the edges, silver light cascading, chains dissolving like mist. Was it madness or the goddess's whisper? The choice loomed, not just for her life, but for the soul of a king who bore his own unspoken chains. In the heart of winter's grip, redemption's fragile thread began to weave. The silence in the great hall thickened like congealing blood, the torch flames guttering as if the very air recoiled from what was to come. Ilara's knees ground against the unyielding stone, the chains of vice around her wrists, their links etched with runes that seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light. She could feel the court's gaze boring into her. A pack of shadows hungry for weakness, their breaths a collective rumble that stirred the fur-trimmed cloaks and armored pauldrons. King Cassian's eyes held hers, unblinking, the gray depths swirling with the tempests of a man who had commanded armies, yet faltered before his own ghosts. He was no stranger to chains, his own, forged of regret for a queen whose death he had failed to prevent, a betrayal that had scarred the lunar rites and left his reign hollow. "Speak," he urged again, his voice threading through the hush like a blade through frost. There was no cruelty in it, only the raw edge of compulsion, as if he too sought absolution in her words. Ilara's lips parted, but fear coiled in her throat, a serpent born of years cast aside. The elders had named her visions heresy, a taint on the bloodlines that bound the packs under the goddess's moon. She was Omega, meant to yield and nurture, not to dream of lights that shattered skies. Yet as she drew breath, the wind outside surged, rattling the high windows like the claws of forgotten beasts. "I am Alara Wynn," she managed, her voice a fragile thread, barely audible over the crackle of flames. But it was not enough. The High Elder leaned in, his face a mask of pious fury, spittle flecking his beard. "Lies! She hides the sorcerer's tongue. Bind her true name and let the goddess judge." He gestured sharply, and 2 guards advanced, their boots thudding like heartbeats on the stone. One seized her chin, forcing her mouth open as if to extract confession by force, while the other raised a ritual dagger, its blade inscribed with silver wards against the unseen. Panic surged through Alara, hot and electric, mingling with the cold seep of iron into her skin. Her blood, warm and defiant, trickled anew from chafed wrists, staining the floor in crimson petals that gleamed like spilled wine under the torches. In that instant, the hall seemed to tilt, the weight of the king's stare, pulling at something deep within her, a recognition she could not name, instinctive as the pull of tide to shore. Cassian rose halfway from his throne, his cloak falling open to reveal the faint scar across his collarbone, a jagged line from the wars that had claimed his mate. He should have silenced her, preserved the order of his court with a single decree. Instead, his hand clenched on the arm of the obsidian seat, knuckles whitening as if her peril echoed his own buried wounds. The dagger hovered, catching the firelight in a wicked gleam. Alara's mind fractured, visions flooding unbidden, moonlight cascading through cracks in the vaulted ceiling, a voice not her own whispering secrets of ancient lineage. It was madness, they said, but in this moment, it felt like awakening. The guard's grip tightened, and she gasped, the sound lost in the rising murmur of the alphas. Then, impossibly, the air grew luminous, a silver haze seeping from the shadows high above. The moon, veiled by the citadel's stone, pierced through, a beam of pure ethereal light that shattered the gloom like breaking ice. Gasps rippled through the hall as the light pooled around Alara, bathing her in its chill embrace. The chains hummed, vibrating against her flesh, and the runes upon them flared, then dimmed as if recoiling from an older power. Elindra Moonveil, a voice intoned, not from her lips but from the light itself, resonant and ancient, echoing off the walls like the toll of a distant bell. It was a name erased from the annals, whispered only in forbidden scrolls, the first Omega of the lunar bloodline, bearer of the Pathfinder's gift, who had once bound the Pax under the goddess's grace. The court froze, alphas shifting uneasily, their amber eyes wide with awe and dread. The chains crumbled then, links dissolving into fine dust that swirled in the moonbeam like stardust on the wind. Alara's arms fell free, the sudden absence of weight leaving her trembling, her bloodied wrists exposed to the light that now traced glowing veins along her skin. She stared at her hands, the crimson stains fading to silver, as if the moon drank her pain and returned it transformed. The guards recoiled, the dagger clattering to the stone, while the High Elder staggered back, his ledger slipping from numb fingers. Cassian stood fully now, his face a storm of revelation and terror. He had heard the legends in his youth, of the Moonveil heir whose emergence could heal the fractured rites or unravel the realm in holy fire. But this fragile Omega, with her haunted eyes and heather scent, was no myth. She was the key to his redemption or its undoing. Guilt, long suppressed, clawed at him. He had banished her kind before, fearing the very power that now stirred his blood. Their gazes locked across the dais, the connection igniting like embers in dry tinder, instinctive, undeniable, yet laced with fear. She saw his fracture, the melancholy king who ruled with iron but yearned for mercy's touch. He saw her curiosity, a spark amid the terror, pulling him toward the edge of duty's abyss. The light faded as swiftly as it had come, leaving the hall in stunned shadow, the wind outside falling to a whisper. Alara rose unsteadily, no longer bound, her bare feet leaving faint imprints of dust on the stone. The court erupted in chaos, shouts of blasphemy, calls for the pyre. But Cassian's voice cut through, a command that stilled them all. Enough. His tone brooked no argument, though his eyes never left her, shadowed with the weight of what he had unleashed. In that gaze, fear warred with a budding curiosity, the first thread of a bond forged not in warmth, but in the cold forge of destiny. She backed away, heart thundering, the taste of freedom bitter on her tongue. The moon had spoken, but at what cost? As guards closed in once more, not with chains, but with wary hands, Alara felt the king's unspoken plea, a silent invitation to flee into the unknown, where their wounds might yet intertwine. The night deepened, Weavos echoing from the peaks, promising trials yet to come. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The chaos erupted like a storm breaking over the peaks, alphas surging forward with snarls that reverberated through the stone. Their claws extended in a frenzy of fear and fury. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs, a wild drumbeat echoing the wind's howl beyond the walls as the silver light's afterglow faded from her skin, leaving her exposed and trembling. The dust of shattered chains clung to her wrists like forgotten ash, a fragile talisman of the moon's intervention, its fine particles shimmering faintly with each ragged breath she drew. She backed toward the dais' edge, the cold stone biting into her heels, her mind a whirl of terror and that strange, burgeoning spark, the name not her own, yet woven into her blood like an ancient scar. Cassian's command sliced through the din once more, sharper this time, laced with the Alpha's unyielding authority. "Stand down!" His voice was thunder-cloaked in frost, and the guards hesitated, their advance faltering under the weight of his gaze. He descended the steps in measured strides, his midnight cloak swirling like shadows fleeing the light, the iron crown catching glints from the dying torches. Up close, his presence was overwhelming, a wall of muscle and restrained power, scented with pine smoke and the metallic tang of old battles. Yet in his eyes, that gray storm held not triumph, but a profound unease, as if the moon's revelation had cracked the armor of his solitude. He had ruled with duty's iron fist, banishing whispers of heresy to safeguard the Pax, but now the goddess's hand had reached into his court, and guilt twisted anew in his gut. What if she was the curse he had long feared, or the mercy he dared not claim? Alara met his stare, her breath catching at the proximity, the instinctive pull of Omega to Alpha warring with the raw edge of her fear. She should have fled, melted into the shadows like the outcast she was meant to be, but her body betrayed her, rooted by curiosity's quiet flame. Who was this king, marked by loss as she was by rejection? His scar, visible now in the torchlight's flicker, traced a path from collarbone to jaw, a reminder of the queen stolen by treachery, a wound that mirrored her own hidden fractures. You saw," she whispered, her voice barely threading the air, laced with accusation and plea. The dust on her wrists warmed inexplicably, as if the moon's touch lingered, binding her to this moment. He extended a hand, not in command, but in offering, his calloused fingers steady despite the tremor she sensed beneath. "Come with me," Cassian murmured, low enough that only she could hear, the words heavy with the melancholy of a man who had forsaken softness for the throne's cold throne. The court milled behind him, the high elder's protests rising like bitter smoke. "She is abomination, the rites demand her blood." But Cassian ignored them, his focus a tether pulling her from the brink. In that gesture, fear flickered in his eyes, not of her power, but of the curiosity she ignited, a spark against the isolation he had armored himself in since his mate's fall. Duty screamed to seize her, to bind what the moon had freed, yet ethics rooted him. She was no threat, but a mirror to his shame. She hesitated, the pull instinctive, a warmth uncoiling in her core amid the hall's chill. But denial surged like the winter gale. This was the king who upheld the laws that had cast her out, the one whose Pax had whispered her madness into exile. Trust was a luxury for the unbroken. She was forged in rejection's fire, her visions a solitary burden. Yet as shouts closed in, an Alpha lunging with bared fangs, Cassian moved, swift, protective, intercepting the blow with a forearm that absorbed the impact, his growl a visceral rumble that sent the attacker sprawling. Blood welled from a shallow gash on his skin, dark and steaming in the cold air, mingling with the faint silver dust that now dusted her own flesh. The sight stirred something primal in Alara, empathy blooming unbidden from the shared crimson, a bridge across the chasm of their worlds. "Run!" he urged, seizing her arm, not roughly, but with a grip that conveyed alliance, his touch igniting a spark that raced through her veins like moonlight on snow. They bolted from the dais, weaving through the throng of stunned alphas, the High Elder's cries chasing them like vengeful spirits. The great doors loomed ahead, flung wide by a gust that carried the scent of fresh snow and pine. The night outside, a vast, unforgiving expanse under the moon's watchful eye. Ilara's bare feet sank into the drifts beyond the threshold. The cold, a sharp embrace that numbed her wounds but sharpened her senses. The crunch of boots behind, the distant weavos of loyalists rallying, the rhythmic thud of Cassian's heart sinking with her own in frantic harmony. They plunged into the shadowed tree line fringing the citadel, the wind whipping branches like lashes, snowflakes stinging their faces as they sought cover in a narrow ravine carved by ancient glaciers. Cassian pressed her against a jutting rock face, his body a shield against the pursuing howls, his breath warm against her temple amid the freezing gale. "The southern packs stir," he confessed in a hushed torrent, guilt etching deeper lines on his face. "Traitors whisper of my weakness since the queen's death. I banished you to silence the unrest, but the moon. It binds us now." His words were a confession, raw and resisted, rationalized as duty's echo even as curiosity drew him closer, the scent of her heather essence cutting through the blood and frost. Ilara shivered, not from cold alone, but from the bond's insidious weave, fear of his power, curiosity for the man beneath the crown. The dust from her chains, now smeared across his wounded arm where their skin touched, glowed faintly, a symbol of their fragile alliance, turning pain to silver promise. Empathy stirred, transforming the instinctive pull into something deeper, a shared vulnerability amid the storm. Yet she pulled back slightly, denial a shield. "You fear me as they do," she said, her voice steadying, eyes searching his in the moon-dappled gloom. "What refuge can a king offer an outcast?" He met her gaze, the melancholy in his eyes softening to resolve, the blood from his gash dripping onto the snow like offerings to the goddess. "The one we forged together, from this night forward." The howls grew nearer, torches flickering like malevolent stars through the trees. But in that ravine's hush, amid the wind's lament and the moon's silent witness, their bond took root, not in easy warmth, but in the crucible of mutual peril, where curiosity overcame fear and redemption's first ember glowed. As the shadows deepened, Ilara felt the weight of choice settle, her visions whispering of trials ahead, enemies closing, secrets unraveling. The silver dust bound them, a recurring mark of the moon's decree, promising not safety, but the raw forge of souls entwined. The ravine's shadows clung like velvet to their forms, the wind's sigh weaving through the jagged rocks as if the mountains themselves mourned the fragile pact forged in haste. Ilara pressed her back against the ice-veined stone, her breath a shallow rhythm that matched the distant weavos echoing from the citadel's heights. The silver dust from her shattered chains lingered on her skin, a faint luminescence tracing her veins like veins of moonlight etched into flesh, warm against the encroaching cold. It had smeared onto Cassian's arm where he shielded her, mingling with the dark blood from his gash, turning crimson to a shimmering alloy that pulsed faintly with each shared heartbeat. She could feel it, that insidious warmth, stirring something buried deep. A gift she had always feared, now uncoiling like a serpent in the frost. Cassian crouched beside her, his broad frame a bulwark against the night, his gray eyes scanning the tree line where torchlight flickered like predatory eyes. Guilt etched deeper furrows across his brow, the weight of his crown a phantom ache even in exile. He had pulled her from the court's maw, yet the act bound him tighter to the unraveling threads of his reign. "The High Elder's loyalists will track us by dawn," he murmured, his voice a low timbre that resonated through the chill air, laced with the melancholy of a king who had traded love for duty's blade. The southern packs sense weakness, my weakness, and her whispers of treason grow bolder. I banished you to quiet them, Ilara, Elindra. But the moon has rewritten the law. His gaze flicked to the silver dust on his skin, curiosity warring with dread. For in it, he glimpsed not just alliance, but the echo of prophecies long sealed away. She turned her face toward him, the heather scent of her essence cutting through the pine and blood, her dark eyes wide with the storm of denial and dawning wonder. How could this broken king, marked by the scar of loss as she was by rejection's sting, become her refuge? The instinctive pull tugged at her core, a warmth that defied the snow's bite, yet she resisted, rationalizing it as survival's cruel jest. Her visions had always been solitary burdens, flashes of silver light unraveling fates, but now, in his presence, they sharpened, insistent. The silver dust warmed further, spreading like liquid starlight across her palms, and with it came the first true manifestation, a whisper not of madness, but of clarity, blooming in her mind like frost flowers on a window pane. The world tilted, the ravine's gloom fracturing into threads of possibility. Ilara gasped, her hands rising unbidden, the silver dust igniting into a soft glow that illuminated the crevices around them. Images flooded her, not dreams but revelations. The citadel's halls awash in betrayal's shadow, the High Elder's ledger hiding pacts with southern rivals, ink stained with the blood of Cassian's fallen queen. She saw the lunar rites fractured, the goddess's favor ebbing like tide from shore, and at the heart, a bloodline reborn, hers, the Pathfinder's gift, capable of mending the pacts or shattering them to dust. The power surged through her, visceral and electric, tasting of salt and iron on her tongue, her body arching as if the moon itself poured into her veins. Pain lanced her temples, sharp as the wind's edge, but beneath it lay purpose, a spiritual fire that burned away the fog of her exile. Cassian seized her shoulders, steadying her as the glow peaked, his touch grounding the torrent. "What do you see?" he demanded, his voice rough with urgency, the Alpha's command softened by the fear flickering in his eyes. Up close, his breath was warm against her chilled skin, carrying the faint spice of forge and fur, stirring the bond deeper despite her resistance. He had always ruled with ethical resolve, melancholic in his isolation. But this, her light revealing the court's hidden knives, struck at his core. The silver dust now traced patterns on his armor, mirroring the ancient runes of the first bloodline, and realization dawned like a blade's gleam. She was no fragile Omega, but the key to his destiny, the heir whose emergence could redeem his guilt-ridden throne or doom it to the wilds. Ilara's vision cleared, the glow fading to embers in her palms, leaving her trembling with the weight of truth. The Elder. "He sold your queen's secrets to the south," she whispered, the words spilling like blood from a fresh wound, her voice laced with the raw ache of unwanted knowing. The rites fail because of it. The moon weeps for the betrayal. I can see the paths, Cassian. The silver binds us to mend or break it all. Tears froze on her lashes, the emotional forge of the moment twisting her heart. This gift was no blessing, but a chain of its own, demanding she choose between her hard-won solitude and the redemption it promised. For him, for the Pax, for the goddess's fractured grace. Fear coiled tight, yet curiosity bloomed, pulling her toward the man whose guilt mirrored her shame, their sense entwining in the confined space like vows unspoken. He released her slowly, his hands lingering, the silver dust sealing their skin in a faint, indelible mark. The melancholy in his gaze deepened to awe, then resolve as the full terror settled. She was the Moonveil heir, born to heal the wound he carried since his mate's fall, yet her power terrified him, for it demanded he confront the mercy he had long denied. "The Pathfinder," he breathed, the name a prayer and a curse, his voice cracking with the philosophy of a soul long adrift. "What is strength if not choosing to wield light amid the dark? Duty warred within him, rationalizing the bond as necessity, yet the instinctive draw resisted no longer, accepted. In the quiet fire of her revelation, the wind howled approval, snowflakes dancing in the dying glow, while distant torches crested the ridge, enemies closing like shadows on fresh snow. Elara met his eyes, the silver dust a recurring symbol pulsing between them, a bridge of blood and moonlight. The manifestation had stripped her bare, exposing the dom occulto that defined her fate, and in Cassian's dawning perception she saw her own reflection, not outcast, but redeemer. Yet the choice loomed, moral and visceral. Embrace this key to his destiny, or flee into the winter's embrace, where freedom tasted of isolation's bitter frost. The night deepened, Weavos rising in challenge, the ravine's silence broken only by their synced breaths. Heavy with the spiritual weight of paths converging, subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. The ravine's chill deepened as the first gray light of false dawn clawed at the horizon, painting the snow in hues of ash and silver. Elara huddled against the rock's unyielding curve, the silver dust from her shattered chains now a persistent veil across her skin, its faint glow ebbing like a heartbeat in the gloom. It clung to Cassian as well, tracing the contours of his armored shoulder where he stood sentinel, a luminous scar that bound their fates more surely than any iron ever could. The wind carried the distant clamor of pursuit, boots crunching through drifts, Weavos rising in a chorus of betrayal that twisted her gut like a blade. Her visions still echoed in her veins, the Pathfinder's gift a double-edged fire, revealing truths she wished buried, the High Elder's treachery, the Southern Alpha's shadow lengthening over the packs. Yet in this fragile refuge, empathy had woven its insidious thread, transforming fear into a reluctant tether to the king whose melancholy gaze mirrored her own fractured soul. Cassian turned to her, his breath visible in the freezing air, the scar on his collarbone stark against his skin where his cloak had shifted. "We cannot run forever," he said, his voice a low rumble laced with the weight of unspoken regrets. Guilt shadowed his features, etched deeper by the night's revelations. He had built his reign on the pyres of the accused, banishing shadows to preserve the light, but now the moon had named her heir, and his hands were stained with the very mercy he had denied. The silver dust warmed under his touch as he reached for her arm, not in command, but in quiet alliance. The instinctive pull between them resisted no longer, accepted, though rationalized, as the goddess's cruel decree. The court will convene at the lunar temple by midday. The elder calls for judgment, and the southern rival, Lord Varen, marches with his host. They will demand your head to shatter the rites for good. Alara's heart clenched, the cold seeping into her bones like accusation. Freedom had always been her solitary dream, a wild exile under the stars where visions could haunt without peril. Yet here, in the crucible of his presence, love's shadow loomed, not the soft bloom of tales, but a redemptive forge demanding she heal the wound he carried since his queen's fall. The silver dust pulsed, drawing her gaze to the bloodied gash on his arm, now crusted with frost, a visceral reminder of the protection he had offered. She pulled away slightly, denial surging like the wind's bite. "And you, will you stand with the outcast or chain me again to save your throne?" Her words hung heavy, laced with the ache of rejection's old scar, her heather scent mingling with his pine and iron in the confined space. He met her eyes, the gray depths swirling with ethical torment, the melancholy king stripped bare by destiny's hand. "I have chained too many souls to duty's altar," he confessed, his voice cracking like ice underfoot. "My queen died because I chose war over her whispers of peace. Varen was her betrayer then, and now he circles like a wolf scenting rot. Forgiveness. It eludes me, as freedom eludes you." The wind howled sharper, whipping snow into their faces, and in that moment, The ravine seemed to narrow, the mountains closing like the jaws of judgment itself. Cassian's hand clenched, the silver dust flaring briefly, illuminating the faint runes on his iron crown, symbols of a reign forged in blood, now questioning its own foundation. They moved at his signal, slipping deeper into the forested folds where ancient pines stood as silent witnesses, their branches heavy with rime. The path wound upward toward the lunar temple, a spire of ice and obsidian perched on the peak where the Pax gathered under the moon's eternal vigil. Ilara's bare feet numbed against the frozen earth, each step a jolt of pain that grounded her swirling thoughts. Visions flickered at the edges, flashes of the temple's altar stained with crimson, the High Elder's ledger open to pages inked in deceit, Varen's amber eyes gleaming with ambition. The gift manifested stronger now, not as torment, but as a spiritual compass, pulling her toward confrontation. Yet the moral dilemma coiled tight: to forgive the traitors who had shaped her exile, or unleash the Pathfinder's light in war's holy fire. Love for this broken king tempted her toward compassion, a redemption that might bind their wounds, but freedom whispered of solitude, untainted by the Pack's venom. As they crested a ridge, the temple loomed, its domes catching the pale light like frozen stars. Below, the Packs assembled, alphas in steel and fur, their forms a sea of gray and white, Weavos rising in ritual challenge. Torches blazed along the perimeter, flames leaping against the wind, casting blood-red shadows that danced like specters of the past. The High Elder stood at the fore, his robes billowing, ledger clutched like a weapon, while Lord Varen emerged from the southern flank, a hulking figure cloaked in ragged hides, his rival's crown a mockery of twisted thorns. Betrayal hung in the air, thick as forge smoke, the scent of old blood mingling with fresh snow. Cassian halted at the tree line, his body tensing as guards spotted them, spears glinting like fangs. "Face them with me," he urged, turning to Ilara, his hand brushing hers, the silver dust igniting a spark that raced through her, warm and insistent. In his eyes, she saw the choice mirrored. War would secure his throne, but doom the rights. Forgiveness might heal the lunar bloodlines, but risk his heart's fragile trust. The bond pulled, tender amid the tragedy, born of shared pain rather than ease. Ilara's breath caught, the wind tearing at her hair, her visions clarifying into a single visceral truth. The elders pact with Varen had poisoned the goddess's grace, and only her light could purge it. She stepped forward, the silver dust swirling from her skin like a mantle, illuminating the path ahead. The Pax turned, a collective growl rumbling through the snow, but in that moment, under the rising moon's gaze, Ilara felt the weight of rebirth stir, not in victory, but in the ethical precipice. To choose love was to forgive the past's blades, weaving Cassian's guilt into redemption's tapestry. To claim freedom was to walk alone, leaving war's ashes for others. The temple's doors groaned open, inviting judgment's storm, and as Varen's howl split the air, she locked eyes with Cassian, the dilemma etching deep. What is power, if not the mercy to heal what duty broke? The silver dust bound them still, a symbol of paths colliding, as the confrontation unfolded in fire and frost, demanding her soul's verdict. The temple's threshold swallowed them like the maw of an ancient beast, its ice-hewn arches groaning under the wind's relentless assault, exhaling breaths of frozen mist that clung to Ilara's skin like spectral fingers. The silver dust, that indelible mark of the moon's decree, swirled from her palms in faint eddies, catching the torchlight and casting prismatic veils across the stone floor. It had become her shadow now, a living emblem of the Pathfinder's burden, tracing her steps with a soft luminescence that both illuminated and betrayed. Cassian's hand brushed hers as they entered, a fleeting anchor amid the rising tide of snarls and murmurs, his touch igniting a warmth that coiled through her veins, instinctive, resisted, yet inexorably drawing her deeper into the forge of their shared fracture. The inner sanctum sprawled vast and echoing, a cavern of obsidian pillars veined with frozen silver, where the altar at its heart gleamed like a blade of moonlight. Packs encircled it in a tense phalanx, alphas from the northern holds and southern fringes alike, their fur-mantled forms hulking under cloaks, stiff with rime. The air thrummed with the scent of blood and pine, undercut by the acrid tang of fear sweat, as uivos reverberated from the vaulted heights, a chorus that shook loose cascades of snow from the cracks above. Torches blazed in iron sconces, their flames leaping hungrily, painting faces in stark contrasts of shadow and crimson glow. At the altar's edge stood the High Elder, his ledger open like a festering wound, pages fluttering in the draught, while Lord Varen loomed beside him, a colossus of scarred muscle and thorn-crowned helm, his amber eyes burning with the feral ambition that had long hungered for Cassian's throne. Ilara's bare feet met the frigid stone, each step sending jolts of numbness up her legs, mirroring the chill that gripped her soul. The silver dust settled in her wake, forming delicate patterns that whispered of paths unseen, her visions surging anew in the temple's hallowed hush, threads of betrayal weaving through the packs, Varen's claws stained with the queen's ancient blood, the elder's oaths twisted into chains of deceit. She was no longer the outcast trembling in exile's grip. The moon had named her Elindra Moonveil, heir to the first bloodline. Yet the weight of that truth crushed her, a gift that demanded she confront the very forces that had forged her rejection. Cassian stood at her side, his posture a bastion of restrained fury, the iron crown glinting like a wound reopened, his guilt a palpable aura that tugged at her empathy, transforming curiosity into a reluctant bond. He had chosen her over duty's decree, pulling her into this storm, but love's shadow loomed tragic, born not of ease, but of the pain they mirrored in each other. Traitors unveil themselves under the goddess's gaze, Cassian declared, his voice a resonant thunder that cut through the din, echoing off the pillars like the crack of fracturing ice. He stepped forward, drawing the pack's eyes, his scar stark in the firelight, a jagged reminder of the night Varen's ambush had claimed his queen, leaving him hollowed by the failure to forgive or fight sooner. The Southern Lord laughed, a guttural bark that stirred the flames higher, his claws flexing as he gestured to the elder. Your reign crumbles, Drakov, like the chains that bound this witch. The moon favors the strong, not melancholic kings haunted by ghosts. Varen's gaze slid to Ilara, predatory and dismissive, seeing only fragility where the silver dust proclaimed power. The elder nodded, his voice a venomous hiss. She is the blight, the false heir. Bind her again, and let the rites consume her blood to purify our packs. The confrontation ignited, like dry tinder to flame. Alphas surged, a tide of steel and fangs, their howls blending with the wind's wail outside. Cassian met the first clash, his blade singing from its sheath in an arc of silvered steel, parrying a spear thrust from a southern warrior with a force that sent vibrations through Ilara's bones. Blood sprayed, hot and metallic, splattering the altar's edge and mingling with the silver dust that now rose from her skin in defensive wisps, forming a shimmering barrier that singed the air. She recoiled, heart pounding a visceral rhythm, the cold stone slick underfoot as chaos erupted, claws raking armor, grunts of impact swallowed by the roar. Varen lunged through the fray, his massive form barreling toward Cassian, their blades locking in a shower of sparks that illuminated the temple in staccato bursts, the king's ethical resolve clashing against the rival's raw hunger for dominion. Ilara's visions fractured the melee into crystalline clarity, paths diverging like veins of ore in the earth, one of war's crimson flood, packs sundered in holy fire, another of forgiveness, mending the lunar rites through mercy's fragile light. The silver dust coalesced around her, warm and insistent, pulling at her core with the moon's spiritual command. She could end it, unleash the Pathfinder's gift to shatter the traitor's bonds, binding Varen and the Elder in chains of their own illusions, restoring Cassian's reign through unyielding power. Freedom beckoned in that surge, a solitary exile where she might wander the wilds, unburdened by the pack's venom, her heart sealed against the king's melancholy pull. Yet as she watched Cassian stagger under Varen's blow, blood welling from a gash across his ribs, dark rivulets tracing the old scar, steaming in the chill, empathy bloomed fierce, a redemptive ache that twisted her denial into acceptance. Love was no reward, but a proof demanding she choose compassion over isolation, healing his guilt with the very light that had once condemned her. With a cry that tore from her throat, raw and elemental, Alara thrust her hands forward, the silver dust erupting in a cascade of lunar fire, not destructive blaze, but a purifying veil that swept the sanctum. It enveloped Varen mid-swing, freezing him in place, not with ice, but with visions of his own betrayals. The Queen's final gaze, pleading for mercy he had denied, the pack's blood on his claws, twisting into serpents that bound his limbs. The Elder gasped, his ledger igniting in ethereal flames, pages crumbling to ash that revealed hidden seals of southern allegiance. The packs faltered, alphas dropping weapons as the light pierced their doubts, revealing the fractures in the rites, the goddess's favor ebbing not from heresy but from the poison of unforgiven sins. Cassian broke free, his blade at Varen's throat, but he hesitated, gray eyes locking with Alara's across the glowing haze. The moral precipice yawned. Slay the rival and claim war's hollow victory, or sheath the steel and offer forgiveness, risking the throne for the spiritual rebirth her gift promised. Blood dripped from his wounds, pooling with the silver dust into a sacred alloy that pulsed on the altar, symbol of their entwined destinies. Alara stepped closer, the wind howling through the open arches like the moon's lament, her voice a whisper amid the stunned silence. What is justice, if not the strength to forgive what shattered us? Her words hung, a philosophical tether, pulling at his soul, the choice now hers to echo love or freedom, war or mercy in the temple's frozen heart where redemption teetered on the edge of blood and light. The packs knelt, Weavos fading to murmurs of awe, but Varen's eyes burned defiance even in stasis, the Elder's form trembling under the weight of exposed truth. Alara felt the bond solidify, tragic and tender, born of this visceral trial. Cassian's hand finding hers amid the settling dust, their palms slick with shared crimson, the silver weaving eternal. Yet the dilemma lingered, ethical and profound. To bind the traitors in chains of judgment or release them to the wilds, forging peace from the ashes of pain. The moon crested higher, its beam piercing the vault, illuminating the path not taken as the temple held its breath in the hush of souls on trial. The temple's frozen heart pulsed with the moon's unyielding rhythm, its silver beam slicing through the vault like a divine verdict, bathing the sanctum in a luminescence that turned blood to mercury on the stone. Alara stood transfixed, the silver dust, born of her shattered chains, now a living aura around her, coiling like smoke from a sacred pyre, its warmth a counterpoint to the wind's keening wail beyond the arches. It clung to her skin, a recurring whisper of the Pathfinder's legacy, tracing luminous paths along her arms where Cassian's blood had mingled with hers, forging an indelible bond in the crucible of revelation. Her visions had stripped the temple bare, exposing the rot at its core, Varen's ambition, a venomous root twisting through the packs, and the Elder's complicity, a ledger of lies that had poisoned the lunar rites since the Queen's fall. Yet in this apex of chaos, where alphas knelt in stunned obeisance and the air hummed with the scent of scorched deceit, Alara felt the weight of her own fracture deepen. Not rejection's old sting, but the spiritual precipice of choice, where power's light could either mend or consume. Cassian's blade hovered at Varen's throat, the rival's form still ensnared in the silver veil, his amber eyes wild with the phantoms Alara's gift had conjured. Echoes of the queen's dying breath, her pleas for mercy drowned in the snows of betrayal. The king's chest heaved, each breath a visible plume in the chill, his scar a jagged furrow from that same night, gleaming wet with fresh blood from the fray. Guilt, that eternal shadow, etched his face in hollows deeper than the ravines outside, his gray eyes locking onto Alara's with a desperation that transcended command. He was the ethical monarch, melancholic sentinel of a fractured realm, who had rationalized exile as necessity, banishment as protection. But now, with the moon's gaze upon them, resistance crumbled. The instinctive pull between them, once denied as folly, bloomed into acceptance, a tender tragedy. Love as proof of souls entwined, not a balm for ease. "End it," Varen rasped from his stasis, the elders' whimpers a faint counterpoint, their voices threads in the wind's howl. "Slay me, Drakov, and claim your hollow crown. The pax will fracture without blood's seal." Alara's heart thundered, a visceral drum against her ribs, the silver dust surging hotter, demanding her verdict. Freedom's call echoed in her veins, a solitary path into the wilds where visions could unfold without the pack's judgment, her omega fragility unburdened by a king's shadowed throne. She could unleash the full torrent, shatter Varen's form to stardust, bind the elder in eternal illusions of his sins, restoring the rites through war's purifying blaze and leaving Cassian to his guilt-ridden sovereignty. Yet as she watched the king falter, his blade trembling not from weakness, but from the moral chasm yawning before him, empathy unfurled like frost roses on barren stone. His melancholy was her mirror, the rejection she had borne in exile, the shame of unseen worth, now reflected in his eyes, haunted by a love lost to ambition's blade, a duty that had chained him as surely as iron had her. What was strength, if not the mercy, to forgive what duty had wrought? The bond pulled, insistent and redemptive, weaving their scents, heather and pine, blood and frost, into a singular essence that warmed the temple's chill. She stepped forward, the silver dust trailing her like a mantle of moonlight, her bare feet leaving glowing imprints on the altar's edge. The pack's murmurs fell silent, Weavos distant now, swallowed by the spiritual hush as the moon crested higher, its light pooling around the combatants like spilled silver. Alara extended her hands, not in wrath, but in release, the dust flowing from her palms in gentle waves that dissolved Varen's bindings. He staggered, claws flexing, but the visions lingered in his gaze, truth's unyielding mirror, forcing him to his knees amid the snow-dusted floor. The elder collapsed beside him, Ledger's ashes scattering like fallen stars, his pious facade crumbling to reveal the broken wolf beneath. "Go," Alara commanded, her voice a resonant timbre laced with the ache of her own rebirth, the words tasting of salt and iron on her tongue. "Into the wilds, where the goddess may yet teach you mercy's path. The rites demand no blood, only the healing of what was sundered." Varen rose slowly, defiance flickering to something akin to awe, his thorned crown askew as he backed toward the arches, the southern alphas following in wary procession. The elder crawled after, a shadow of the zealot he had been, their exodus a procession of redemption's fragile dawn. Cassian lowered his blade, sheathing it with a sound like sighing wind, his body sagging as the weight of choice settled. Sacrifice burned in his eyes. The throne's iron grip yielded for compassion's uncertain grace. His guilt transmuted not to erasure, but to purpose. He turned to Alara, bloodied and unbowed, the silver dust bridging the space between them, sealing their palms as they clasped in the moon's embrace. Union bloomed then, not in triumphant fanfare, but in quiet cura, her light mending the scar on his collarbone, silver threads weaving flesh anew while his resolve anchored her visions, grounding the Pathfinder's fire in shared strength. Love, resisted through fear and rationalized as destiny's jest, was finally accepted. A redemptive forge where rejection birthed renascimento, their wounds entwining like roots beneath eternal snow. The Pax rose as one, Weavos transforming from challenge to homage, the lunar rites stirring anew in the air's purified hush. Torches flared brighter, flames dancing in harmony with the wind's softened lament, casting golden hues over the obsidian pillars now veined with fresh silver. Ilara leaned into Cassian, her head against his chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heart sync with hers, a rhythm born of trials, tender amid tragedy. The silver dust settled, a recurring symbol etched into their skin like vows under the moon, promising not endless peace, but the ongoing proof of souls redeemed. In that moment, under the goddess's watchful gaze, the temple exhaled, snowflakes drifting through the arches like blessings, the night yielding to a dawn laced with hope's faint glow. What was destiny, if not the freedom to choose healing over chains? Their bond, forged in blood and light, illuminated the path ahead, a realm reborn where every alpha's wound found its omega healer, and rejection's ashes birthed an unbreakable flame. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.